Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into the fascinating world of genetics and how it plays a role in movement disorders. Specifically, we'll be focusing on Parkinson's disease and dystonia.
Fascinating stuff.
And get this, our source material for this deep dive is a lecture by Dr. Elizabeth Slow, who you know is a leading clinician and teacher in this field.
I've heard her lectures are fantastic.
I'm telling you, you're in for a treat. We're going to cover everything from the basics of DNA to cutting-edge research like antibody treatments, personalized medicine, all the cool stuff.
Sounds great.
I mean, think about it. Ever wonder why some people can roll their tongues and others can't? That's determined by our genes. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how genetics shapes who we are.
Absolutely. Dr. Slow used that very example, the tongue rolling. It's a great way to illustrate how our genes influence our traits, even seemingly simple ones.
Right, and she actually demonstrated this in her lecture. Apparently, about 70% of the audience could roll their tongues.
And 30% couldn't. It really drives home the point that our genes are at work behind the scenes, shaping all these little aspects of who we are.
Exactly. And those genes, well, they're made up of DNA. It's like the instruction manual for our bodies, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. DNA is like a language, with just 4 letters in its alphabet: C, T, G, and A.
C, T, G, A. Got it.
And these letters, they combine to form words, which are our genes. And those genes, well, they're organized into chapters, and those chapters are chromosomes.
Okay, I'm following. So we humans have 46 of these chromosomes, right? Packed with all this genetic information.
That's right, 46 chromosomes. Each one is like a little library of genes.
So if DNA is the instruction manual and chromosomes are like the chapters, then each gene is like a specific instruction, a recipe for building something, right?
Exactly. Each gene carries instructions for making a specific protein, and these proteins carry out all the essential functions in our body. They do everything from building and repairing tissues to fighting off infections. It's amazing to think how much these tiny molecules do.
It really is. But here's the thing that gets me. We humans share a whopping 99.8% of our DNA with each other. So why aren't we all walking around looking and acting identical? If the instructions are almost the same, why are we so different?
That's where those tiny variations in our DNA come into play, that remaining 0.2%.
Only 0.2%. Seems small.
It may seem insignificant, but that tiny fraction of our DNA is what makes us unique. It's responsible for all the diversity we see in the human race.
Incredible, isn't it? Such a small difference can have such a huge impact. Okay, so how does all of this relate to movement disorders like Parkinson's? How do those tiny variations in our DNA make someone more likely to develop these conditions?
Well, sometimes a single change in a gene, a mutation, can be enough to cause a disorder.
We talked about cystic fibrosis earlier.
Exactly. That's a classic example of a monogenic disorder, meaning it's caused by a single gene mutation.
But with movement disorders, it's usually not that straightforward, is it?
Right. Parkinson's disease, for example, is often what we call multifactorial. It's not just one gene, but multiple genes, along with environmental factors that all contribute to the risk.
Like diabetes, where your genes might make you more susceptible, but lifestyle choices play a huge role too.
Exactly. So it's a complex interplay of nature and nurture. And even then, when it comes to Parkinson's disease, it's estimated that only about 10% of cases are directly caused by gene mutations.
Wait, only 10%? What about the other 90%?
That's what we call sporadic Parkinson's disease. The exact cause is still a mystery, but researchers believe it's likely a combination of many different genes and environmental factors. Think of it like a scale, as Dr. Slow described it. On one side of the scale, you have genetic variations that increase your risk. On the other side, you have factors that might protect you.
So having a certain gene doesn't guarantee you'll get Parkinson's. It's about the balance between these risk factors and protective factors.
Precisely. It's a complex puzzle, and researchers are still working to put all the pieces together.
It's amazing how much research is being done to try to solve this puzzle. But I have to ask, if it's only 10% of cases that are directly caused by gene mutations, what are the main culprits? Which genes are we talking about?
Well, 2 genes that are often implicated in Parkinson's are SNCA and Parkin. These are associated with what's called early-onset Parkinson's disease, meaning it develops before the age of 50.
So if you have mutations in these genes, your chances of developing Parkinson's at a younger age are higher.
That's right. And then there's the LARK2 gene, which is the most common genetic risk factor for late-onset Parkinson's.
Ah, the LARK2 gene. That one comes up a lot in Parkinson's research.
It does. And the SNCA gene is particularly interesting because it led to the discovery of something called alpha-synuclein, which is a protein that plays a key role in Parkinson's.
Now that name rings a bell. Remind me, how does alpha-synuclein fit into all of this?
Well, alpha-synuclein is the main component of those Lewy bodies that we talked about earlier.
Right. The clumps of protein that are a hallmark of Parkinson's.
Exactly. So by studying the SNCA gene, researchers were able to pinpoint alpha-synuclein as a major player in the development of the disease.
That's amazing how one discovery can lead to another like that. It's like a chain reaction of knowledge.
Exactly. And speaking of amazing researchers, two people you should definitely check out are Dr. Lorraine Cullia and Dr. Connie Morris.
I think I've heard of them.
Dr. Cullia is doing incredible work on alpha-synuclein, and Dr. Morris is a leading expert on the LARK2 gene. They're both making significant contributions to the field.
I'll definitely have to look into their work. Okay, so we've talked about the genes linked to early onset Parkinson's and the LARK2 gene for late onset. But what about the other 90%, the sporadic cases? Is there any way to predict who might be at risk if there's not a clear genetic cause?
It's tough because with sporadic Parkinson's, it's not just about one gene or even a handful of genes. Remember that scale analogy?
Yeah, the one with risk factors on one side and protective factors on the other?
Well, in sporadic cases, it's like that scale is loaded with all sorts of tiny weights, both genetic and environmental. And it's the combined effect of all those factors that determines your overall risk.
So it's not just about having a bad gene, it's about the whole picture.
Precisely. And researchers have identified at least 23 potential genetic risk factors for Parkinson's. And then on top of that, you have all the environmental factors that come into play.
Wow, 23. That's a lot to consider.
It is. And it's not just the number of genes, but also the fact that we don't fully understand how they all interact with each other and with the environmental factors. It's a really complex area of research.
And what about those environmental factors? Can you give me some examples of what might tip the scales towards developing Parkinson's?
Sure, some of the things that have been linked to an increased risk include exposure to pesticides and certain industrial chemicals.
Makes sense. Those are things we know can be harmful to the brain. What else?
Head injuries have also been linked to an increased risk, as well as certain lifestyle factors like diet and exercise.
So those healthy habits we're always hearing about might actually help protect against Parkinson's.
They might. The research is still ongoing, but there's definitely evidence to suggest that taking care of your overall health can have a positive impact on your brain health as well.
Okay, so we've got pesticides, industrial chemicals, head injuries, diet, and exercise. Anything else?
Well, this might surprise you, but smoking actually seems to have a somewhat protective effect against Parkinson's.
Wait, smoking? Really?
I know, it sounds counterintuitive, right? But several studies have shown a lower incidence of Parkinson's in smokers compared to non-smokers.
So are you saying I should take up smoking to protect myself from Parkinson's?
Absolutely not. The health risks of smoking far outweigh any potential benefits. But it does highlight just how complex this whole picture is.
It certainly does. And it's not just Parkinson's that has these genetic links, right? Other movement disorders are influenced by our genes as well.
Absolutely. Dystonia, which causes involuntary muscle contractions and abnormal postures, and ataxia, which affects balance and coordination, both have strong genetic components.
Wow, so many movement disorders are tied to our genes in some way. It makes you wonder how many other conditions might have a genetic link that we haven't even discovered yet.
It's definitely a frontier of medicine. And what's particularly interesting about dystonia and ataxia is the sheer number of genes that have been linked to these conditions.
Really? How many are we talking about?
For dystonia, researchers have identified over 30 different genes that could be involved, and for ataxia, it's even more, over 122 genes.
122 genes, that's incredible. So with that many potential genetic causes, how do doctors even begin to diagnose and treat these conditions?
Well, it can be challenging for sure, especially with ataxia. Over 50% of cases have no known cause.
Wow, so even with all this research, there's still a lot we don't know.
Absolutely. But genetic testing is becoming increasingly important in diagnosing and understanding these conditions. Right now, it's mostly offered to people with a strong family history of movement disorders, those with early onset symptoms, or individuals in high-risk populations.
That makes sense. But I imagine some people might be hesitant to get tested if there's no cure for these conditions. What's the point of knowing if there's nothing you can do about it?
That's a valid concern. But even without a cure, there are still many benefits to genetic testing. For one thing, it can provide a definitive answer to the why, which can be incredibly valuable for individuals and their families.
I bet that peace of mind can make a big difference when you're dealing with a difficult diagnosis.
Absolutely. And beyond that, Genetic testing can sometimes provide insights into the likely progression of the disease. For example, certain genetic forms of Parkinson's, like those associated with mutations in the Parkin gene, tend to be much slower progressing than other forms.
So knowing which gene is involved could help someone plan for the future and make informed decisions about their care.
Exactly. It's about empowering individuals with knowledge and helping them take a more proactive approach to managing their condition.
I like that a proactive approach. It's about taking control of your health, even in the face of a challenging diagnosis.
That's the spirit. And when it comes to Parkinson's, understanding the genetic component can be particularly helpful in guiding treatment strategies.
Oh, you mean like with personalized medicine?
Exactly. And that's something we'll dive into more deeply in the next part of this deep dive. So stay tuned. We'll be back to explore the incredible potential of personalized medicine and how it's revolutionizing the way we treat movement disorders. You know, it's really fascinating. This idea of using genetic testing not just to diagnose movement disorders, but also to help guide treatment strategies. Dr. Slow talked about this quite a bit in her lecture.
Yeah, this whole concept of personalized medicine is really taking off, isn't it? It's like we're moving from a one-size-fits-all approach to something much more targeted and individualized.
Exactly. And Dr. Slow highlighted some really exciting areas of research where this personalized approach is already starting to make a difference. One that really stood out to me was the development of antibodies, specifically designed to target that pesky protein we talked about earlier, alpha-synuclein.
Ah, alpha-synuclein, the one that clumps together in the brains of people with Parkinson's, forming those Lewy bodies.
That's the one. Remember, those Lewy bodies disrupt brain function and are a key factor in the development of Parkinson's symptoms.
Right, right. So these antibodies are being designed to basically break up those clumps, those Lewy bodies, and prevent further damage.
Precisely. It's like sending in a microscopic cleanup crew to target and dismantle those toxic alpha-synuclein aggregates. The hope is that by clearing out these clumps, we can slow down or even stop the progression of the disease.
That's incredible. Are these antibody treatments available now, or is this still in the experimental stage?
It's still in the research phase, but things are moving quickly. Dr. Slow mentioned that there are actually 3 different clinical trials underway right now, each exploring a different antibody that targets alpha-synuclein in a unique way.
Wow, 3 trials already. That's pretty amazing. It sounds like there's a lot of hope riding on these antibodies.
There is, and remember that GBA gene we discussed, the one that increases the risk of developing Parkinson's?
Yeah.
Well, researchers are also focusing on developing treatments that specifically target that pathway as well.
Hold on, can you back up a sec? You're talking about the GBA pathway, but I'm not sure I fully grasp what that means. What does that pathway do? And why is targeting it so important for treating Parkinson's?
Sure, let's break it down. The GBA gene, it provides instructions for making an enzyme that's responsible for breaking down cellular waste. Think of it like a garbage disposal system for your cells.
The garbage disposal, okay.
But when this gene is mutated, that enzyme doesn't function properly, and this can lead to a buildup of cellular waste, which researchers believe contributes to the development of Parkinson's.
Ah, okay. So by targeting the GBA pathway, these new treatments would be helping those cells get rid of that waste and prevent some of the damage that leads to Parkinson's.
Exactly. And get this, Dr. Slow said that there are 3 compounds targeting GBA that are currently in clinical trials. It's a perfect example of personalized medicine in action, finding the right treatment for the right patient based on their unique genetic makeup.
This is so cool. It's like we're moving from a one-size-fits-all approach to treating Parkinson's to a much more tailored, individualized approach. It's pretty exciting.
It is, and it doesn't stop there. Remember that LARK2 gene we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
the most common genetic cause of late-onset Parkinson's?
Yeah, the one that Dr. Connie Maris has been researching.
Right. Well, scientists are now developing LARK2 inhibitors drugs that essentially block the activity of this gene. And you know what? The early results are actually quite promising.
So if someone has a LARK2 mutation, taking these inhibitors could potentially prevent or at least slow down the development of Parkinson's.
Exactly. Dr. Slow explained that these LARK2 inhibitors have shown good tolerability in early studies, which means they don't seem to cause significant side effects. And now they're moving into larger clinical trials to really test their effectiveness.
This is incredible. It's like we're entering a whole new era of Parkinson's treatment. We're not just trying to mask the symptoms anymore. We're actually starting to target the root causes of the disease.
That's exactly right. And I think it's important to remember what Dr. Slow emphasized about personalized medicine. It's not just about drugs and therapies. It's about looking at the whole person, considering their age, lifestyle, other health conditions, and of course, their unique genetic profile.
Right. It's a much more holistic approach. It's not just about finding a magic pill. It's about creating a comprehensive treatment plan that takes all of these individual factors into account.
Precisely. Imagine a future where someone newly diagnosed with Parkinson's has a whole team of specialists, neurologists, geneticists, therapists, and so on, all working together to create a personalized plan just for them. This plan would address not just their motor symptoms, but also their sleep, their mood, their cognitive health, and any other issues that might arise.
That's amazing. It sounds like the ideal model of care for people with Parkinson's.
It certainly is the direction we're heading. We're moving away from the one-size-fits-all approach and really embracing the complexity of these conditions. Every person's journey with Parkinson's is unique, and their treatment should reflect that.
I couldn't agree more. And this focus on personalized medicine definitely gives me a lot of hope for the future. It feels like we're finally starting to get a handle on these incredibly challenging conditions.
I agree. It's an exciting time to be following this field, for sure. And speaking of exciting developments, Dr. Slow also highlighted another area where genetics is playing a major role: predicting prognosis.
Oh, you mean going beyond just knowing what's wrong and actually being able to predict how someone's condition might progress over time?
Exactly. Researchers are now studying how specific genetic variations might influence the type and severity of symptoms a person experiences, as well as the rate at which their disease progresses.
Wow, that's incredible. Imagine being able to know with a reasonable degree of certainty whether your Parkinson's is going to primarily affect your gait, your tremor, or your cognitive abilities. That would be invaluable information for planning for the future and making informed decisions about your care.
It would, and it would allow doctors to tailor treatment strategies from the very beginning, focusing on the areas that are most likely to be affected. It's all about proactive and personalized care.
It really is. This is starting to sound like something straight out of a science fiction movie, but it's becoming reality right before our eyes.
It is. And that leads us to another cutting-edge area of research that Dr. Slow touched on: pharmacogenomics.
What? Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for me. I've never heard of pharmacogenomics before.
It's a fascinating field. It's all about exploring how our genes influence our response to medications.
So you're saying that our genes can actually determine whether a particular drug will work for us or not, or whether it might cause side effects?
Exactly.
Wow. So in the future, instead of doctors having to rely on trial and error with different medications, they could use our genetic information to prescribe the drugs that are most likely to be effective for us and avoid the ones that probably won't work or might cause problems.
That's the goal. It's all about maximizing treatment effectiveness and minimizing the risk of adverse reactions.
Mhm.
Imagine a world where your doctor can look at your genetic profile and say, okay, based on your genes, this specific medication is likely to be the most effective for you, and it has the lowest risk of side effects.
That would be amazing. No more wasted time on medications that don't work or worse, cause debilitating side effects. It would be a game changer for people with Parkinson's, wouldn't it?
It would. It's a powerful tool for personalized medicine, and the research in this area is moving incredibly fast. Dr. Slow even mentioned a study that's currently underway that's looking at how genetics could predict a person's response to deep brain stimulation.
Really? Deep brain stimulation. So they're trying to figure out if they can predict whether or not DBS is likely to be successful for someone based on their genes.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing stuff. The study is being led by Dr. Alfonso Fasano, who's a specialist in deep brain stimulation. Imagine being able to know in advance whether DBS is a good option for you based on your genetic profile. It would take a lot of the uncertainty and anxiety out of making that decision.
It really would. It's just incredible how much genetics is changing everything about how we approach movement disorders, from diagnosis and treatment to now even predicting prognosis and guiding surgical decisions. It's really a revolution in medicine.
It is. It's a truly exciting time to be following this field for sure.
Welcome back, everyone. So in the first two parts, we explored this amazing world of genetics and how it's transforming our understanding of movement disorders. The potential of personalized medicine, wow, it's mind-blowing, isn't it?
It really is. Dr. Slow ended her lecture by talking about this future where movement disorders are no longer treated with a one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, we'd have strategies tailored to each individual's genetic blueprint.
Like, imagine a world where instead of just being diagnosed with Parkinson's, you're told you have Parkinson's with a specific LRRK2 mutation, and then your treatment plan is designed specifically for that mutation.
Precisely. Imagine treatments for Parkinson's categorized based on the specific genetic mutations involved. So you'd have GBA, LRK2, SNCA, all with their own targeted therapies, each one addressing the unique biological mechanisms behind those mutations.
So it's not just about managing symptoms anymore, it's about actually tackling the disease at its source.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond symptom control and towards disease modification.
Disease modification, that's a powerful concept. We'd actually be changing the course of the disease, not just managing its effects.
It really is a paradigm shift. And think
Yeah.
about this. What if we could identify people who are at risk for Parkinson's before they even show symptoms?
Wow, early intervention. That would be incredible. We could potentially delay or even prevent the disease altogether.
Exactly. We could use genetic testing to identify those individuals at higher risk and then proactively implement lifestyle changes, dietary interventions, maybe even early stage medications to minimize their chances of actually developing the condition.
We'd be shifting from reacting to the disease to preventing it. That's huge.
Absolutely. And this personalized approach, it goes way beyond just medication.
It's about looking at the whole person, right?
Yeah.
Their lifestyle, environment, everything.
Exactly. A holistic approach. For example, someone with a genetic predisposition to Parkinson's might also be at higher risk for anxiety or depression. Personalized medicine would take that into account.
So in addition to medication, they might benefit from counseling, support groups, other mental health interventions.
Precisely. Treat the whole person, not just the disease. It's about meeting individual needs, not just following a standard protocol.
It sounds like a future where healthcare is truly patient-centered, where each person receives a customized plan that's just for them.
That's the vision Dr. Slow presented. Movement disorders no longer viewed as a single entity, but as a spectrum of conditions with distinct genetic causes and therefore tailored treatment options.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. I mean, from the basics of DNA to this mind-blowing potential of personalized medicine, it's amazing how much genetics is impacting our understanding of movement disorders.
It really underscores the power of scientific discovery. Understanding our genes empowers us to take control of our health in ways we never thought possible.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of awe, really, at how far we've come and hope for what the future holds. It's an incredible time to be alive, witnessing these groundbreaking advancements in genetics and medicine.
It is. And although there's still much to learn, the pace of discovery is truly remarkable. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
So as we leave our listeners to ponder these incredible possibilities, what's one final thought you'd like to leave them with?
I think the key takeaway here is this. Imagine a world where we don't just treat diseases, but we actually empower people to take control of their health destinies. That's the real power of personalized medicine. It gives us the tools to understand ourselves at the most fundamental level and use that knowledge to live longer, healthier, and more fulfilling lives.
I love that. It's a message of hope and a call to action for all of us to continue exploring and pushing the boundaries of scientific discovery. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and until next time, keep those minds curious and stay tuned for more fascinating deep dives into the world of science and medicine.